The mid-1960s were a fascinating crossroads for horror cinema. The old monsters had not yet disappeared, but the genre was beginning to evolve. Gothic castles were still loomed in candlelight. Three, two, one. The mid-1960s were a fascinating crossroads for horror cinema. The old monsters had not yet disappeared, but the genre was beginning to evolve. Gothic castles still loomed in candlelight, ancient curses still haunted rural villages, and mad scientists still experimented in shadowy laboratories. Yet filmmakers were quietly pushing horror into stranger and darker territory. 1966 stands as a remarkable snapshot of that moment in time. Across Britain and continental Europe, a collection of eerie and imaginative films emerged, each exploring the traditions of Gothic horror while hinting at the genre's future transformation. Nearly 60 years later, these films, fascinating as they are, remain relics of an era when horror was both elegant and experimental. Welcome to Resurrected Horrors, where we dig through the graveyard of genre history to celebrate films that were reaching milestone anniversaries this year. I'm your host, Saul Muerte, and in this episode, we're resurrecting the class of '66. Few studios defined Gothic horror in the 1960s quite like Hammer Film Productions, and in 1966 they revived their most iconic monster in Dracula, Prince of Darkness. After refusing to appear in several earlier sequels, Christopher Lee returned to the role that made him a horror legend. Interestingly, Lee's Dracula speaks no dialogue throughout the film, relying entirely on physical presence and predatory menace. Directed by Terence Fisher, the film embraces the visual splendor Hammer had perfected: Gothic castles, flickering candlelight, and an atmosphere thick with dread. The resurrection sequence alone remains one of the most memorable in Hammer's catalogue, reminding audiences that even in death, Dracula's shadow never truly fades. Hammer's 1966 output wasn't limited to vampires. That same year, the studio delivered one of the most haunting films with The Plague of the Zombies. Set in a fog shrouded Cornish village, the story follows a mysterious epidemic that soon reveals a far more sinister cause. The dead are not merely dying, they are returning. Long before the modern zombie apocalypse took over the genre, the film drew from Caribbean voodoo folklore to present the undead and enslaved bodies raised through dark ritual. The graveyard sequence, where corpses claw their way out of freshly turned earth, remains one of the most chilling images in Hammer horror. Interestingly, the film predates The Night of the Living Dead by 2 years, offering a glimpse of zombie mythology before it was transformed by the modern era. While Christopher Lee was terrifying audiences as Dracula, he was also delivering one of his most energetic performances in Rasputin, the Mad Monk. Loosely inspired by the infamous Russian mystic, the film presents Rasputin as a towering and hypnotic figure whose charisma masks a dangerous appetite for power. Lee reportedly relished the role, throwing himself into the performance with wild intensity, whether drinking heavily in taverns, manipulating aristocrats, or unleashing Rasputin's unsettling powers of persuasion. Though not supernatural horror in the traditional sense, the film captures the darker side of Gothic storytelling: obsession, corruption, and the terrifying influence of a man who refuses to die quietly. Hammer's fascination with cursed villages continued with The Reptile, another atmospheric gem from 1966. Set Once again, in rural England, the story revolves around a mysterious illness that leaves victims drained of blood and marked by strange wounds. What follows is a tale in colonial guilt and ancient curses, culminating in the revelation of a monstrous secret lurking within the village. The film's design, lighting, and eerie pacing highlight Hammer's remarkable ability to transform modest studio sets into richly textured Gothic worlds. Even today, The Reptile remains one of the studio's most unusual and underrated monster films. Beyond Britain, European horror was exploring a darker and more experimental territory. Spanish filmmaker Jess Franco delivered one of his early genre works with The Diabolical Dr. Z, a strange and stylish tale of revenge and mind control. After a disgraced scientist dies under mysterious circumstances, his daughter continues his research using hypnotic techniques to turn a nightclub dancer into an instrument of murder. Part Gothic horror, part mad science thriller, the film hints at the more surreal and provocative direction European horror would soon embrace in the years ahead. The films of 1966 arrived at a fascinating moment in horror history. The Gothic tradition that had dominated the genre for decades was beginning to give way to something new. Within just a few years, horror would become more visceral, more psychological, and far more explicit. But the films of the class of 66 remain beautiful reminders of the genre's early elegance. Castles, curses, hypnotic villains, and creeping dread, crafted with atmosphere, imagination, and a love for the macabre. Nearly 60 years later, they still whisper from the shadow of horror history today. And here on Resurrected Horrors, we'll always be ready to bring them back to life. Thanks for listening. I'm Sean White. Goodbye.